You can't escape from Dracula. Some idiot put that in the paper on Sunday. Like they never write about Sean without referring to him as 007 or Roger Moore. Always. So you ignore it. And simply isn't true. It doesn't annoy me. I think it's pathetic. So I'm proving people wrong all the time. The person who wrote that bit in The Independent on Sunday, last Sunday, as a headline to the piece, they said Christopher Lee cannot escape the curse of Dracula. The person who wrote that is never going to be able to escape the curse of being thought a complete idiot for having written something like that, because it isn't true. And the proof is on the screen.
I lay quiet, looking out under my eyelashes in an agony of delightful anticipation.
Listen to them, the children of the night. What music they make.
Welcome, folks, to the Dracula podcast. I am your host, Lawrence Burgess, or LB for short. Thank you to Adam Stover, Rob, and Martha of Southgate Media, and most of all, you for listening. We aim to bring you thoughtful, stimulating media reviewing the films, books, music, plays, and personality that make Stoker's creation so beloved, the criticism to inform your purchasing decisions, interesting guests, and the needs of our communities. If you wish to get in touch with us, drop us a line. We're everywhere. We're on Facebook, we're on iTunes, we're on Twitter, we're on Libsynth, and everywhere around your friendly interwebs. The reason why we're here today is we're here to pay tribute to the life of Christopher Lee. And as such, we promised that we would bring John Johnson back to talk about the great career of the man, and I know no one better or more educated on the life, the career, and the legacy of a giant, perhaps the last giant in cinema. So, John, when I mention the words Christopher Lee,
I go back to the age of 3 when I first saw Christopher Lee on the screen that I can remember, and gravitated to him ever since. The film was, as I've talked about before, Dracula, Prince of Darkness. Christopher Lee haunted my nightmares. For several weeks after that, my father was very much into horror films and so forth, and so Christopher Lee was a household name in our house. And throughout my entire life, not only have I enjoyed watching his performances, but as an actor also I've learned from them.
Christopher Lee is a household name. That's very rare here in the United States.
It is.
Why do you think that is?
The influence, the voice. When my father talked about a man developing his voice and things, he always said that I should try my best to imitate Christopher Lee, that it would rub off, that type of thing. Mm-hmm. But Christopher Lee, his the Dracula films and all that. I mean, he was just one of those pivotal characters. And like I said, I gravitated to him in just about every film that I could find of him.
Not a lot of people really understand the full legacy of Christopher Lee, especially here in the United States.
Very underrated. He's very underrated and not given the credit that he should have been. And I felt that even the knighting, being knighted as he was for services to film, that should have happened a long time before. That was way late.
Agreed.
Way late.
So if you want to sum Christopher Lee up, and it's hard to do for people here in the U.S., how would you do it? How would you sum him up? How would you sum someone who's been so much to so many generations up?
I don't think that it could be done any better than what the Sherlock Holmes group, the Baker Street Babes, said. And they summed it up this way: a life well lived that we wish would have lived forever.
So let's talk about Christopher Lee.
Mm-hmm.
His greatness really didn't start in film. Tell us about what happened before film. What was he before film?
Well, he had a distinguished service during World War II that we really don't hear very much about. I mean, he was in some Secret Service engagements and things, and he was behind the scenes and very influential in British intelligence. And my goodness, look at his pedigree. I mean, his mother was an Italian countess. I mean, the Carandini line. He was step cousins with Ian Fleming of James Bond notoriety.
And the descendant of Charlemagne.
A descendant of Charlemagne, Robert E. Lee, the Confederate general, and also John Lee, the famous astronomer.
He reminds me of how small the world really is.
Mm-hmm.
Everything, we always talk about what unites us here, and it seems like he has a lot of threads pulling in a lot of different directions. He's got the literary thing with Sherlock Holmes and Dracula. He's got the nerd thing going on with Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. And he also has the historical thing, and he also has the Bond thing. I mean, there's so much that he's done, but I guess emblematically it starts in film, really.
Well, don't forget this. He's also a rock star.
I mean, what wasn't he? Like, I said this before on the Dracula podcast.
Mm-hmm.
I said if I would have lived 1% of the life of Christopher Lee, I would have lived as good a life as a person probably can live.
Mm-hmm. Very true. Very true. When it comes to a fantastic life, a life of legend, I think Christopher Lee's the man. And just by watching his movies and things, we don't get into the depth of who he really was. I mean, and he, of course, his autobiography, the Lord of Misrule, which don't have in my collection, and I wish I did.
I have the first edition, Tall, Dark, and Gruesome.
Yes.
I have that one. And it was really interesting to see his philosophy. He really was an ambassador of education, multiculturalism, more than one language, someone who is a global phenomenon, not just here in the U.S., but where we know him from, really, is his films. When did we start to know about him? When did he really start to make his mark?
Well, he had a few non-speaking roles, beginning, I believe, around 1947 or so. He was in Hamlet, the Sir Laurence Olivier production, along with Peter Cushing, I might add. The two were together in that one, and he wasn't even supposed to be on the set. He was actually filming another non-speaking role on another set. He dressed as a guard under the behest of a friend of his who was playing a guard in Hamlet, went over, actually appears in the film without Laurence Olivier even knowing it until much later on, as Christopher Lee says. I always thought that was a fascinating story, but we don't really get to know Christopher Lee as Christopher Lee until The Curse of Frankenstein.
Talk about that.
The Curse of Frankenstein, of course, the big production. Hammer is coming out into their own. They're bringing back the monster films. Universal had left their appeal back in the early 40s. They'd sort of let the whole thing fall apart, really. They weren't producing the quality films in the monster genre anymore, so Hammer picks up the torch. Beautiful Technicolor masterpiece. They're going to show Mary Shelley's Frankenstein in all of its splendor and glory. And they have Peter Cushing, of course, as the Baron Frankenstein. Peter would go on to play many times. And as the creature, they had this unknown yet tall, lanky 6'4", different accounts. Christopher said in two different accounts. One, he says he's 6'4", another he said he was 6'6". There he is, and they had to go about, and they had to come about with this makeup which looks like someone's been in a terribly bad car accident. They put it on him because there was a problem with Universal Studios, and even if Hammer would have recreated the Karloff makeup, of course, they would have been under lawsuit.
I don't see a reason why they should have anyway.
Well, exactly.
I like the direction they went to, because with each generation, the monsters really redefined themselves.
Right.
And really, it was Lee and Cushing who redefined this.
Yes.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Curse of Frankenstein was 1957 and also directed by Terence Fisher?
Absolutely right.
Fisher and Lee really had a long-standing relationship with movies.
Well, the three of them, Cushing, Lee, and Terence Fisher, the three became a team. And of course, with the success of The Curse of Frankenstein, even though Chris had no speaking roles in the entire film, he goes on to the next movie for Hammer, where he has a very great role, and he does speak in it. And I believe you know which one that is.
The very next year, and we've discussed Horror of Dracula and
Yes.
Terence Fisher's direction and how interesting it was. What really struck me about what Fisher did with Christopher Lee is the way he shot him in Horror of Dracula. He shot him from these interesting low angles to project him as a larger-than-life person, which, in contrast with Bela Lugosi, which was very focused on the facial features of it.
Right.
You got a bit of a more physical presence with Count Dracula.
Yes. And the audiences responded greatly. I know Christopher came to America and for the publicity tour along with Peter Cushing, and they were in New York City, and there was a special showing around midnight for the Broadway crowd that were getting out of their shows, and they were coming to the movies to see this version of Dracula. And he said that when he appeared on the screen, that tall figure at the top of the stairs, basically in silhouette, that the place erupted. They applauded. They cheered.
So the cinema was full. And some of them were well and truly tanked up. I don't know what they thought they were going to see. And the lights went down. Woo! The lights went down, the curtains parted. And the certificate came on. And then there's the famous shot of the stone coffin with the word written on the side and the drops of blood. And they went berserk. Because they knew what was going to happen eventually. And eventually, of course, there's the famous shot when Jonathan Harker, played by the late John Van Eysen, senses and turns around, and there's this silhouette at the top of the stairs. And the roof lifted. Roars of applause, cheering away like mad, laughing themselves silly, by which time I was under the seat. What they thought they were going to see, I have really no idea. What they did see is what everybody's seen since. And apparently a reasonably normal-looking person walking down the stairs and go over and saying, "Good evening, Mr. Harker," The silence, it was quite beyond belief. It was like cutting the sound in a film. Whoosh, like that. Total and complete silence. Total.
It was.
For the rest of the entire film.
The Creature and Dracula, those weren't the only two, quote, monsters that he played for Hammer. Also, there was another one.
Yes, there was.
And what was that?
Well, that would have been Chorus. Yes, the Mummy.
Why do you think was Chorus? The reason why they didn't use Imhotep was to also keep it copyright protection?
Probably so. I would suggest that that's probably right. And boy, he says nothing as Chorus. There is a flashback where you see him as the priest, and I can't recall if he says anything in that point. But anyways, all of Lee's action is in the eyes playing Chorus. The film is fantastic, and Lee's use of his eyes to emote every bit of emotion, whether it be thinking back on the queen that he had loved in past life, or looking at the reincarnation of that queen, which is Peter Cushing's wife in the Hammer production of The Mummy, or in dealing with the revenge that he's inflicting upon the English people that have desecrated the tomb, or what have you. It's all in the eyes.
The great actors don't need to say anything.
No.
Really.
No.
If it reminds me a lot about Tom Hardy and what he did with Bane. He had his nose and mouth covered up with a mask, and the expressions were from his eyes. I see a lot of Christopher Lee in Tom Hardy's performance as Bane, that sort of commanding presence, although Tom Hardy's a wee little man compared to Sir Christopher.
Right.
What he was. But folks really know Sir Christopher, mostly, globally, as Count Dracula.
Yeah.
Not only did he play him in the Hammer franchise, but he also played him once in an Italian version of Bram Stoker's Tale, directed by Jesus Franco, along with Dracula and Son, a bit of a spoof on the genre. Can you talk about Dracula and Son?
Dracula and Son is a very interesting film. It's a French film, and I have seen a good part of it because it's very hard to find a full copy of it. Very comedic, very comedic. It's basically a farce of all the stuff that he had done previously, in my opinion. Christopher does such a wonderful job in the whole thing, as he always does. No matter what material the man was given, he would make the most of it and make it believable. Whether it be the craziest thing or whether it be Jenna, he could do it all. And he always did the best with what he had there on the screen and made it just a unique thing.
Sir Christopher, it seemed, to love to delve into literary characters.
He did.
He delved into things like Sherlock Holmes and the Three Musketeers. Talk about Sherlock Holmes and the Three Musketeers and what he meant in those films.
The first outing that Christopher had in anything that had to do with Sherlock Holmes was as Sir Henry Baskerville in the 1959 Hammer production of The Hound of the Baskervilles opposite Peter Cushing as Sherlock Holmes and Andre
lived in
Morel.
Whitstable.
Who lived in Whitstable. Yes, I've seen him on his bicycle. Yes, I've seen him eating vegetables, as the song says. But anyways, Sir Henry Baskerville. And it's always interesting for me, a Sherlockian, you know, we always read of Holmes being this tall, spare figure. And Sir Henry, you know, in all the illustrations would look up at Holmes, but in this one, Holmes is looking up at Sir Henry. I always thought that was an interesting thing, but that was the first outing, was in Hammer's The Hound of the Baskervilles. Great performance.
Do you think that if Sir Christopher was Holmes and Peter Cushing was Sir Henry, what do you think that would have been like?
I don't think it would have had the gravitas. Not in the beginning, because Peter went on to have a very distinguished career as Holmes. He was an actor and a rare one. There's a book by that title as well in regards to Peter's performance as Holmes. So, yeah, I think this was right for Peter.
It's weird. You can't talk about Christopher Lee and not mention Peter Cushing.
They were best friends.
They have so much in common, even when their careers diverted.
Yeah.
Years later, Christopher Lee played a Star Wars villain after Grand Moff Tarkin.
Yeah.
It's so strange how they mirrored each other.
Mm-hmm.
But he not only played Sir Henry in Sherlock Holmes films, he was also the man himself.
He was the man himself, beginning in 1962 with the German film Sherlock Holmes and the Deadly Necklace, which was loosely based on the Holmes novel The Valley of Fear. Chris does a wonderful performance as Holmes opposite Thorley Walters as Watson. The only problem with that film is that as it was a German film, a foreign film, when it was brought and to the domestic audience here in the United States, what did they do? They overdubbed. And what happened? We lost Sherlock Holmes, a.k.a. Sir Christopher Lee, to the voice of Bob Dorian, who was the AMC channel's announcer for many years.
We've railed on the Hammer films quite a bit, but its greatest sin, when just jumping back just a little,
sure.
Hammer film's greatest sin, when he played Dracula and any of the others, was not utilizing Christopher Lee's best asset, his voice.
Absolutely.
That's why I like Scars of Dracula so much, is because you got to see him talk, you got to see him relish in those lines a bit. And in Horror of Dracula, though that was what he's known for the most, he really didn't say that much.
It's true.
In Prince of Darkness, he said nothing. And
he hissed a few times.
He did hiss a few times, but even in Taste the Blood of Dracula, it's not that much. And it's a shame. Only when you really hit the 70s is when he starts to talk as the Count.
Yeah.
And Stoker has a lot of great material to work with, as folks of this podcast know, but Christopher Lee loved Stoker.
Yes, he did.
He loved him, so he tried to inject Stoker in all the films he was in to give him something, any part of Stoker that he could, and he was very particular.
You've been critical over the years of the...
I have.
Of the... what has been left out of Stoker's novel in the films. But what
everything.
What I wanted to ask you was, when you performed, or when you played Dracula for Hammer, what was the quality in Stoker's character that you most wished to convey?
What did I want to put into the character, do you mean?
Yes.
Well, the first thing was that I wanted to play Stoker's character. I did make a rather indifferent film in Spain called Count Dracula, in which I was Stoker's Dracula, an old man, white hair getting younger, dressed, I quote the book, entirely in black from head to foot, without a single speck of colour. That's Stoker. When I did the first one, I read the book, of course, and it wasn't remotely like the book, really. But, of course, the result was amazing, because I really wasn't very well known, either by name or face. And, well, it became world famous. I tried to bring out the aspects of the character.
Let's go and talk for a moment
that
about
Stoker
his
had written.
breakout film, the film that he felt stopped the typecasting that he was in as the Count. That was a role that he played in a film by Billy Wilder in 1970 entitled The Private Life of Sherlock Holmes. In this particular film, Robert Steffens played Sherlock Holmes. Christopher Lee played Mycroft Holmes, Holmes' older brother, smarter brother, the Diogenes Club master, so on and so forth. He received great acclaim for this role.
It's hard to imagine Sir Christopher as lazy, though.
He wasn't in this film. It was the complete reverse. Look at BBC Sherlock, how Mycroft is played by Mark Gatiss. This is where Mark got his inspiration, was from this film, as he's said many times. Now, the interesting thing is, Christopher Lee, at the time of this filming, was the only actor to have portrayed both Sherlock and Mycroft. Today, there are two actors, Christopher Lee and Richard E. Grant. Both have done that.
Also, Christopher Lee not only did that, not only did he play Sherlock, he also played Sir Henry, as we mentioned before.
Right.
So his ties are just as deep in
Very
Sherlock
deep.
Holmes as they are in Count Dracula.
Well, he's also gone on to play Holmes in his golden years. This is, the concept that's in Mr. Holmes that's coming out with Ian McKellen. Christopher Lee did back in 1991-92, with Sherlock Holmes and the Leading Lady and Sherlock Holmes and the Incident at Victoria Falls, where he gives a wonderful performance of Holmes in later life opposite Patrick McNee from The Avengers as Watson.
So, he's just so mired in literature,
Yes,
literary
he is.
roles.
Yes, he is.
Talk about the Three Musketeers.
The Three Musketeers. He played the Count de Rochefort, which is the right-hand man of Cardinal Richelieu, the villain of the piece. And he played it to great effect, eye patch and all. Lee was a swordsman. He had actually more screen credits in sword fights than any other actor in his lifetime. He actually carried a wound with him until the day of his death that was given to him by Errol Flynn, the great Errol Flynn, in a sword fight where he nearly took his finger off in a sword fight. It was, as Lee said, it was after lunch, and Errol Flynn was known to imbibe a little bit at lunch, and he lost his focus, and Lee nearly lost his finger. But there's some great sword fights in The Three Musketeers, The Four Musketeers, and The Return of the Three Musketeers, in which he was also in opposite the likes of Charlton Heston, Oliver Reed, Frank Finlay, and Richard Chamberlain.
And we're not even out of the 70s yet.
No.
And it's so much. There's so many films. He was in over 250 films.
Exactly.
I mean, even in small credits, we're not even touching about the documentaries and the interviews and all the media that he's been in.
Right.
Narrating audiobooks. He did a version of Dracula. He did Poe.
He did Holmes.
Did Holmes.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much that he did, and it's unfortunate. I hate to go here, but I have to. It's unfortunate that people really know him for 2 or 3 things here in America. And it starts off with Tim Burton, really. That's when the whole re-injecting him into society here. Tim Burton,
Sleepy
I think,
Hollow,
had a healthy respect
for
Christopher Lee. And you can tell because of his gothic propensities.
Mm-hmm.
From Sleepy Hollow to The Corpse Bride to Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and even to the Jabberwocky and Alice in Wonderland, and later on his last film with Tim Burton, which was Dark Shadows. But he seemed to be, strangely enough, Tim Burton was kind of stereotyping Christopher Lee.
Somewhat, I think.
The roles were good.
Well, I tell you, I felt somewhat like that the roles became less and less as we went on. I know Lee is aging and all, but you remember the Burgermeister, the Sleepy Hollow, up against Johnny Depp there and leaning over that desk. That was classic Christopher Lee, the menacing figure, and that was just an awesome performance. Then you had a lot of Christopher Lee in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, or Willy Wonka. What is it? Charlie and the Chocolate Factory? Willy Wonka's the other one. Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
It's one of the films that I dare not speak its name.
Understand. But Lee's performance in that was outstanding. And then you've got Dark Shadows, which I was very disappointed in because Lee has very little to do. He's sitting... filmed completely, just sitting there and speaking as a sea captain in that wonderful voice. It wasn't enough for me, a Christopher Lee lover, but any movie with Christopher Lee in it. I mean, he makes the movie.
He could have played Captain Donaldson.
I think he could have. I think he could have. He would have probably given you a run for your money.
He might have.
Though
he might have.
R. Donaldson was probably the best on the market.
Yeah, I think so. But I talk about this a lot. But it's a shame that the only things that Christopher Lee is really known for in the U.S., without digging, they know him as Count Dooku in Saruman.
Yes.
They know... and Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, it was a bad movie.
It was.
It's a bad movie with a bad script, bad direction, and even the CGI that it was known for was just bad.
Mm-hmm.
It's one of those movies that you hate that exists.
Right.
But I still watch every now and then for one specific reason, and that's Christopher Lee's performance.
Yes.
How can Christopher Lee, how can a man with such presence make a movie as bad as George Lucas's Attack of the Clones watchable?
2 words. Sheer talent. You take a role as an actor and you make it better by every possible way you can. And the number one thing that Christopher Lee did in every movie was he made the part believable. Number 2, what he did, he always did something new that you would not expect with a character.
He's fighting a CGI Yoda.
True. Which he says he did all of the stunts for, except for, of course, they did mix in.
We've already prefaced that with his sword fighting talents. He went in Episode 3, another bad movie.
True.
Just a couple scenes with Sir Christopher, but he took this franchise, which is unwatchable. Episode 1 is unwatchable, and he made it interesting. Count Dooku is interesting. He voiced Count Dooku on the animated Star Wars 2, I believe. And if I'm wrong, the nerds will absolutely correct me.
Sure.
He also loved Tolkien.
He knew J.R.R. Tolkien. Yes, the man knew J.R.R. Tolkien.
And thus he was placed as Saruman in Lord of the Rings.
Though he wanted to play and always thought that he should have played Gandalf.
What do you think about that? What do you think about Christopher Lee as Gandalf? And switch it around on Ian McKellen. Because Ian McKellen can play villainous very well, as we've seen in Apt Pupil.
Absolutely.
In fact, I think Apt Pupil is Ian McKellen's best movie.
Quite frankly, I think that the casting, how they have it now, is right. Had they filmed the live version many years ago, which it wouldn't have been as effective as Peter Jackson's version, then I would see Christopher doing it. But I think that it was cast appropriately. Well, they asked Tom Baker to come in and read for both Gandalf and Saruman as well. Doctor Who. I think that Peter Jackson got it right with Ian as Gandalf.
When you look at Saruman, when you look at what Christopher Lee did with those roles, and even in the little bits in the third one and the little bits he had in The Hobbit, why does he stand out? Why again? These were actually pretty decent films, and I give I like the second one. That's actually my favorite, The Two Towers. That's actually my favorite of the whole mess. But what makes Christopher Lee? Why does it fuse together well? Is it the literature thing? Is it the acting thing? What is it? Why does it fit so well?
Well, I think it's all of the above, Lawrence. I mean, think about it. The man had a legitimate connection to the story. He knew the author, number one. He had a love and affinity for the story, number two. He's quoted as saying that he reads and rereads Tolkien on a regular basis. He's as bad as I am with Sherlock Holmes, for goodness sakes. So he has the innate and ingrown love of the material, and then there's that presence, that acting gravitas that only Christopher Lee can give. You know as well as I do, when you know material and you love material, and then you bring that material to life, there's a magic that's there that cannot be beaten. And Christopher Lee shows that, even in Saruman.
He has a genuine love for what he does.
Well, that's easy for me. It's a film you've never seen. Unfortunately. It's a film which should be seen. All of you know that there is a nation called Pakistan.
In 1997, I went to Pakistan. I spent 10 weeks in Pakistan with Indian actors, with British actors, with Pakistani actors, and I played a man called Mohammed Ali Jinnah, which is, in French you would say J-I-2-N-A-H, Jinnah. He was the founder of Pakistan, a man of great vision, incorruptible, great integrity, brilliant man, friend of Gandhi. They were both lawyers, and he founded Pakistan, and I played him in this film. And I know it's the best thing I've ever done, by a long, long way. It's a very good movie. It's a very good movie, and everybody in it is very good, and it is truthful too, historically accurate. And it was very well received in Pakistan in the cinemas. They were full every night, every day for 3 months. It's been seen in festivals, the London Film Festival, Los Angeles, New York, Houston, Cairo. Everywhere it's been seen. It's had wonderful reviews as a picture, and I must say the best reviews I've ever had in my life as an actor, but nobody will show it. They won't show it. The distributors will not show it at the moment, because they're afraid. And up to a point, I say up to a point, one can understand that. Because this is about a Muslim, Musulman, you say, it's about a Muslim leader, a Muslim politician. He was not a fundamentalist, he was not a terrorist, he was not a man who sent people to kill other people, he was not Osama bin Laden, he was not Al-Qaeda, he did not hit the World Trade Center on September the 11th, he did not fight against Israel, etc., etc., etc. Because this is the mistake that the world makes, most people. There are 100, I don't know how many Muslims in the world, but I mean 100 million or more, over 1 billion I would think probably. And what people don't understand, I said this the other night actually, when I spoke to the audience, is that this is not the true Muslim, what is happening now, what has been happening. It simply isn't. They're a minority. And this is not the true Islam. It is not. And again, it is only a minority. And the extremists. But because this is the story of a Muslim leader, the people in the West who don't really understand and don't know about this history, they get worried, they get frightened, they think, my God, if we put this picture on the theatre, maybe somebody will put a bomb there, or set fire to the place. It's possible, one can't deny it. But for me, it's a great tragedy, and for everybody who was connected with the film, because it is a very good picture. It is actually my best performance, no question, no question. And it's also historically true.
Christopher Lee said his best performance was in Jinnah, Muhammad Ali Jinnah.
Yes.
What is your favorite Christopher Lee performance? What is your favorite, and what do you think is the best Christopher Lee performance?
Well, the one that had the most influence on me, beyond scaring the dickens out of me as a child, is Dracula. I have to say, was Sherlock Holmes.
Okay.
I have to say that because that came at a time when I had first discovered the stories, and I found a love in the way he portrayed Holmes, and a vulnerability in him, trying to maintain that facade which is Sherlock Holmes. You know, the stiff exterior. You know, the gentleman and the arrogance and all that went up against Irene Adler. I thought that was a very unique thing that Chris was doing in his interpretation of it, and from that, taking and studying his technique and all that in a character that I dearly loved. That's where it started for me. That was my I would say that was one of my favorites. The film, one of the two, well, both of the 90s Sherlock Holmes films he did.
And he worked even in his later years. He was doing video games. He was Ansem the Wise in the Kingdom Hearts trilogies.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, he has these connections to Disney. He's got these connections to Lord of the Rings, Star Wars, vampires, literature, James Bond. He's in everything. But I really what gets me about, he's like a 5-pronged monster in my eyes.
Mm-hmm.
First of all was his voice.
Yes.
My favorite Christopher Lee performance was in Scars of Dracula, because he looked scary, the story was spooky, and he was given some really good lines to say. That was the one that stands out to me the most.
Well, now, let me preface, and I'm sure you will agree with me, the man never did a bad role. He didn't. Every performance by Christopher Lee is an awesome performance.
Even when he was singing in that movie, My Time.
Exactly.
I'm old-fashioned, très fin ordinaire. That I want a fresh Manhattan with white Anglo-Saxons everywhere. A black Russians, no pink lady. Give her the Singapore sling. A Moscow mule is not your baby, so highball the vodka and name your sting. Be a big shot,
Drink up, my friend.
with a bull shot.
All of it there. Yes, wonderful.
The first is the voice. The second is that he makes bad films and gives them gravitas. Episode 2, I've already touched on that. Another thing he does.
Here's another one for you for that list. Gremlins 2. Dr.
Gremlins
Catheter.
2.
Ugh.
The New Batch.
Yes.
Unfortunately, wasn't as good a movie as the first.
No.
I would have liked to seen him in the first movie.
But
Gremlins.
Dr. Catheter was a great
Dr. Catheter.
presence on the
What a
screen.
name.
Yes.
What a name. But another part of it, besides giving bad films gravitas and his voice,
Yes.
was he brought value to cheap productions. And I'm going to reference specifically Jesus Franco's version of Bram Stoker's Dracula. The Italian version, from the Kmart fangs to the Walmart blood
To the German Shepherd wolves.
it was a mess. But you saw Christopher Lee kind of happy there.
What about this great castle? It is, I presume, the family home.
True. The shadows of my past remain here. We are the second Magyars. We have a right to be proud. But in us flows the blood of many brave races. The blood of Attila is in these veins. To us was entrusted for centuries the guardian of our lands. The Lombard, the Bulgar, the Turk poured their thousands against our frontiers. We drove them back. The Draculas have ever been the heart's blood, the brains, the sword of our people. One of my race crossed the Danube and destroyed the Turkish host. Though sometimes beaten back, he came again and again against the enemy, till at the end he came alone from the bloody field, for he alone could triumph. This was a Dracula.
And then he was doing Dracula's monologues. He was bringing Stoker's speech, dressed all in black. An old man going young.
Yes.
The way he dealt with Lucy, the eyes, and his dealings with Herbert Lom. A very interesting performance.
It was a very interesting performance, and I think you are absolutely right. He was looking at this production, and in the filming process of this production, he is finally doing what he said so many times he wanted to do, and that was to bring Stoker's Dracula to life. And I bet in the final edit, when he saw all of these things coming together and when the film was produced, there was disappointment. Matter of fact, I know there was.
Can you imagine what Christopher Lee would have done with a Peter Jackson budget, with a Terence Fisher direction, with a solid script as Bram Stoker's Dracula?
Throw Peter Cushing in as Van Helsing for me.
Yeah. Can you imagine
Oh
that?
my goodness.
Just think about that just for a moment. Let that shock resonate.
Let's let the audience think about that.
But another film that really stands out to me, and it's got a Terence Fisher connection too, was The Devil Rides Out.
Excellent.
He's a
film about
hero.
that. Yes, he is.
He's hero. He bucks that trend of being a spooky villain, and he was given a lot to do. He had a complex character who goes through a lot, a character who focuses on the humanity. And that's why I like The Devil Rides Out. You might disagree with me on this. Scars is my favorite, but I think the best Christopher Lee performance was in Man in the Golden Gun, Francisco Scaramanga.
At $1 million a contract, I can afford to, Mr. Bond. You work for peanuts.
A hearty well done from Her Majesty the Queen and a pittance of a pension. Apart from that, we are the same. To us, Mr. Bond, we are the best.
There's a useful four-letter word, and you're full of it.
Mr. Scaramanga, yes. Well, as I said before, being the step-cousin of Ian Fleming, he knew who the character was based on. There was a real Scaramanga, and apparently Ian Fleming couldn't stand him then. So, yes, I think Christopher Lee also, of course, I've heard him say this in interviews and things, the whole thing. He's having a lot of fun with this.
He's funny.
Yes, he is.
He's charming. He's spooky.
He's
intimidating.
Back to one of his rules. When playing a villain, always give the audience something they will not expect.
That's why it's so good.
Exactly.
I mean, he really touches on all the tropes. And in his own way, he's a bit heroic, Francisco Scaramanga.
Right.
He's a bit heroic in his own way. He thinks he's doing the right thing.
Well, I'll tell you, with a sideman like Hervé Villachez, Tattoo, Mr. Scaramanga, he has, you can't go wrong. Poor Knick-Knack, yes.
Poor little fella. Always giving the shaft.
And the flying car, and
Speaking of shafts, Francisco also gave the shaft to one of the Bond girls. Was that a bad pun?
That was a terrible
bad pun. Okay.
When I kill, it's on the specific orders of my government. And those I kill are themselves killers.
Oh, come, Mr. Bond. You disappoint me. You get as much fulfillment out of killing as I do, so why didn't you admit it?
I admit killing you would be a pleasure.
You should have done that when you first saw me. But then, of course, the English don't consider it sporting to kill in cold blood, do they?
Don't count on that.
I could have shot you down when you landed, but that would have been ridiculously easy. You see, Mr. Bond, like every great artist, I want to create an indisputable masterpiece once in my lifetime. The death of 007, mano a mano, face to face, will be mine.
But Christopher Lee was talking about in one interview being in, I believe it was downtown Dallas, doing publicity for the film, and I believe he got in trouble on the streets for having the pistol out, and he's trying to explain to the police officer that no, this isn't real, it's a replica of the he got into some trouble.
Yeah, those pins will get you in trouble every time.
Yes, they
golden
will.
Pins.
Remember that he take all the pieces apart, everything was in his pockets. And I love the scene where this guy's basically telling him he's fired from a job, and there's no hard feelings, and the whole time Christopher's just smiling, and he's putting his gun together with all those components out of his pockets.
But what a cinematic life. Even in 2013, he did a documentary called Necessary Evil, the supervillains of DC Comics.
Right.
He's talking about the Joker. He's talking about Darkseid, Black Adam. And he's bringing what would have been a hodgepodge little mini biographies about supervillains, which we all love.
Mm-hmm.
And he's making it cinematic.
Exactly.
With his voice. It all ties in together.
Well,
his voice, his performance,
and
bringing production value.
Let's speak about his voice for a minute, because he has a film that's about to be released that's nothing but his voice, and it is, I believe it's Tales of the Imagination, which is the Tales of Edgar Allan Poe, which he voiced, and now they are releasing, I guess, with action with them. But you've got to think too, Christopher Lee, his career basically started in 1948. The film was Corridor of Mirrors, which I've never seen, but it was a non-speaking role, role of Charles, apparently. He did everything.
It goes from speaking to non-speaking, and also, by the way, Mr. Lee dabbled into the heavy metal.
A rock star, yes. Well, you think about it, Vincent Price and he and Alice Cooper were all friends. Peter Cushing had done a pop record. No White Peaks was the name of the song that he did, which was on a French label. Peter Cushing was already above 80 when he recorded it, so it was really an interesting recording. And Chris is right up there about the same age doing heavy metal. I mean, the last few years, in his recording of I Am I, Don Quixote, wonderful. Dream the Impossible Dream, he does a great job on that. But there's so many. The man could do anything.
Singing Treebeard's song.
Yes. Excuse me for that.
No, it's good. Can you give your best Christopher Lee impersonation? Let's hear it. Your best Christopher Lee impersonation.
I'm not sure that I can, but if I was to do it, this would be the way that it would sound.
That's pretty good. Let's see, if I had to try it...
You have elected the way of pain!
That was always one of my favorites.
But you know, Christopher Lee, we're talking about all these great things he did, but let's talk about something else that not many people realize. They look at him in these roles and they think of him as being sort of scary and all. Christopher Lee was just a fine fella with a great sense of humor.
Talk about being a fine fellow. Well, as we've discussed, the only reasons why he did the third film, the fourth film, and the fifth film in the Dracula franchise was to keep people in work.
Then the trouble started. This is also in my book, so I'm not saying this for the first time. I got another script from my agent, third one. And I read it and I said, I'm not going to do this. He said, why not? I said, it's terrible. I mean, the dialogue is not good, the character isn't Stoker's character at all. I'm just standing there in a corner and occasionally doing something, for someone, but not much more. I said, I don't want to do it. And my agent was absolutely horrified because Peter Cushing was also with him. And if I'd refused, that would have been the end of that. This happened with the third film and the fourth film and the fifth film. I turned them all down. Said no. And I got hysterical telephone calls from Hammer saying, what's this I hear about you saying you won't do this? It's happened 3 times, 3 films. I said, no, I'm not going to do it. I don't have to. I don't want to. You've got to. You've got to. You have to. You must. And I said, why? They said, because we've already sold it to the Americans with you in the part. Which annoyed me a bit. And then, which I'll never forget, think of the people you'll put out of work if you don't do it. Well, that's a dreadful thing to say to somebody. So I can truthfully say the only reason I made 3, 4, and 5, or whatever it was because all the crew were my friends. It was like a family. It really was. And I wasn't going to put them out of work. I couldn't. So that's a story a lot of people don't know, but I can assure you it's the truth.
Not only did the studios pull a cheap one on him and say, oh, by the way, you have to do these films, and if you don't do them, look at the people you do it out of work. He could have said no.
Right.
But he did these films for the people that he cared about, that he had a relationship with.
Exactly.
Terrence Fisher's gone. He's not directing these Dracula films anymore after Prince of Darkness.
Mm-hmm.
He's doing these for the people and the relationships that he's built.
That's exactly right.
He went back to Peter Jackson in his 80s and 90s.
Well, even with, there's a movie in the 80s that doesn't get very much attention. I believe it's about 83 or 84, The House of the Long Shadows. The only reason really that he did that production, by what I read, is because 3 of his best friends were in it. Vincent Price, Peter Cushing, and John Carradine. They were all together, all 4, in this film together, with Desi Arnaz Jr., that is.
What a match.
But I'm going to tell you what, it's a good story. It's got an interesting plot twist at the end. Sheila Keith also appears, one of the Hammer slasher films ladies. Sheila Keith as their sister. But he does a fine performance there. He and Peter Cushing were just such great friends, as he and Vincent Price were, and they all shared this fun sense of humor. Apparently, Peter and Christopher Lee had a lot of jokes about Sylvester the Cat, and they love doing impersonations and telling stories. There are some YouTube videos of their last meeting together that are just wonderful to watch, and it's just them reminiscing, and you can see both of them, the true love and friendship that they shared. Even in the last Christmas speech that Christopher Lee ever gave to the world, through YouTube, he's wearing a hat that Vincent Price had willed to him, a funny off-collared hat that Vincent used to wear at Christmas time. So he had some great relationships with some very wonderful people. He also had a wonderful relationship with actual historical figures beyond the actors that he knew. He played Rasputin, we know that, for Hammer Films. Not only had he met the murderers of Rasputin when he was a child, but he also met the daughter of Rasputin, who looked the actor over, who had seen him portray Rasputin on the screen. She looked at him and said, "You have his eyes." Speaking about her father and Christopher Lee. He's just one of those fascinating people. He knew everyone, and he did everything.
It seems, but what really strikes me about it, and in wrapping up this conversation, I think about this. What we've got with Christopher Lee is someone who is touched on everything, who's been in all sorts of media, and he could have very easily gone to his head.
Yes.
But it didn't.
That's right, it didn't.
You know how difficult that is?
It's very difficult, but above all things, who was he? Christopher Lee, and he knew that. Whether he be playing Dracula, whether he be playing Frankenstein's monster, the Mummy, Sherlock Holmes, Saruman, Count Dooku, or even Death on Saturday Night Live, which he did back in the 70s, he was always Christopher Lee, and he always honored that first and foremost. He was himself.
I think that's really important, and that's probably the legacy he left behind. Always be yourself. Always appreciate, always care for, always delve into kindness. And he really was a groundbreaker. Multiculturalism, many languages, uniting countries, going into things like Muhammad Ali Jinnah. He talked about it, a film that you haven't seen. He spoke to American audiences. He stood up post 9/11 and said this man was not a terrorist.
That's right.
And delved into the differences. And I don't think there was a better ambassador for literature and history and multiculturalism than Christopher Lee.
Or UNICEF.
I mean, you can name so much, and you get so much. And honestly, we could go on for days talking about the legacy he left behind. But this is just a very small drop in an ocean, which is Christopher Lee's career.
Yes. Well, he also said that he wanted to die with his boots on. He wanted to be working when he passed. From 1948 until, let's see, there's a film to be released, it says here this year, Angels in Notting Hill, as Mr. President. That whole time, he had just accepted a contract and was getting ready to start work on a film with Uma Thurman when he passed. And it's just incredible, at the age of 93, still working as much as what he did.
That's 65 years.
Yes.
65 years of cinema. Not
just cinema, but quality cinema. Quality performance.
A lot of people don't even live to see 65.
No.
It's astounding. And by the way, before he was cinema, he was participating in World War II.
Yes.
How many exclamation marks can you put in a sentence about a man like that?
That's exactly right. Exactly right. As one reviewer said of him, say something about Christopher Lee to your grandkids, and they will know who he is because of Star Wars and Lord of the Rings. Ask your grandparents about Christopher Lee, and they will know who he is through his earlier films. That is the reach that the man has. Generation after generation has grown up with him. It's a great loss. It's a great loss.
When Christopher Lee passed, what went through your head?
Well, it was the first thing that I saw when I woke up. Check the morning news. I'm laying there in bed and just happened to pick up the cell phone and look at headlines, and that was the very first thing that I saw. I had to get up, could not believe it. I was amazed. But at the same time, knowing he was 93, I knew it was going to happen, but I didn't want it to happen. He's a hero of mine. He's a hero of mine. I cried.
Same.
I cried.
Same here.
And even right now, I could get emotional real easy.
Of course.
So,
but that's
some people would think that's silly.
No, well, I talk a lot on this podcast about disconnection, the things that unite us, and the things that bring us together. And when you talk about things that bring us together, Christopher Lee is the perfect physical representation, whether in media or in film or anything.
Yeah.
So when I heard of it, I mean, I experienced all the stuff, and I've only cried for two celebrities.
Mm-hmm.
Only two. Heath Ledger and Christopher Lee. And Christopher Lee, he lived so long and so well, and my wife was just speaking the other day that, I thought he would live forever.
Mm-hmm.
And he was still performing, still giving out quality work later on. But it is such a loss. And people can learn from the career of Sir Christopher Lee. They can learn about him through his words, through his interviews. We are very blessed and very fortunate to have had him for so long.
Yes.
But at the same time, it still stings.
And thinking about his legacy, I strongly feel that we are a part of that legacy. The Dracula podcast, the Dracula, the audio drama, all of that is a part of that legacy, because in so many ways we are connected through that talent, which was Christopher Lee. We wouldn't be here talking about him on this podcast if we weren't.
No. And we have a deep love of the book itself.
Yes.
More than really anything. We have a deep look of the love itself. That's what possessed me to go into a 2+ year quest to make the best version of Dracula ever made. And I know that, when this year, when it's released, near my birthday,
Mm-hmm.
when it's released, I know that it will have done predecessors proud.
Well, how many times throughout the whole production did you and I discuss what Christopher Lee said about doing Stoker? His words were there with us. Yes.
At least weekly, we would talk about. Just to let you guys know, this is a fully dramatized version of Dracula. All of it. Every single bit of it.
Yeah.
16.7 hours. With full music, sound effects, everything. And we recorded it in a studio. It began with an idea about a script, to build it, to bring it to life. Through this whole process, John was with me since the beginning. And we talked about the importance of doing Stoker. And from the first time I met John Johnson, the first time, a few years ago, we were sitting and you were discussing Christopher Lee and what he wanted to do and how special Bram Stoker's work was. That was Christopher Lee's message. And he was preaching about it. He would go to Dublin. He would go to the U.S.
Yeah.
He would go on tour, go on circuit, and he would talk about the importance of it. But, folks, it all ties in. Kindness, multiculturalism, the book, friendships, relationships. It all ties in. And Christopher Lee is a perfect representation of the legacy of Stoker.
Yeah.
The legacy of literature. Why read? Why escape? Why does it connect us even though it's such a fantastic story? Why do we still... Immortality. Sex, death, and immortality. And we're all, we seek our sexual partners, we seek our sexual equals, something that Christopher Lee understood. Death and immortality. Someone we thought that wouldn't die, but who will, in essence, live forever through films and media.
That's true.
It all connects.
Well, I'll even say this on a personal note. The lessons that I learned from watching him as an actor, about presence, about speech, about all the things that an actor should add to a role, that I carry with me. And Christopher Lee,
It's invaluable.
Yeah, but he will be there on the stage with me anytime that I'm there.
It's invaluable. I mean, and you've got a lot. You had a lot to do with Abraham Van Helsing.
Oh yeah.
You had a lot to do with it, and you have a very large role which is coming very soon.
And Lee will be there as well.
And you have a lot to do with it,
Yeah.
which we'll reveal later. But If this can influence all of you who are listening to go out and learn about the man.
Yeah.
Learn about his work. Why he was so good on cinema for so long. Why he was important to so many people. It seems fake. It seems unreal. But if just take 10 minutes and do a simple Google search, and you'll find that he created a very spectacular career and made the world a better place. He really did.
That he did.
That's a rare thing to say about someone.
He did so much good for so many people, with the world not even realizing it because they saw him as a villain on screen.
Mm-hmm.
You think about that.
Yeah.
And not only a villain, in many respects, the greatest villain to ever be written.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. It's not even close. Count Dracula is the most diabolical character in the history of literature and the villain. There's no question about that. But to have someone so kind play that is there. It's everlasting, and it doesn't stop.
There's another mirror with Peter Cushing, the Gentleman of Horror.
The Gentleman of Horror. Wow. John, I appreciate you coming on and talking about the life of Christopher Lee.
So glad.
I'm not sure whether I don't know what to call this. I don't know whether to call it a celebration. I don't know whether to call it a memorial, a lesson, a history. I have no idea what to call this. A tribute. I don't know.
You know what I think? I think that you...
I don't know what to call it.
I think that you hit it there a minute ago. I think it's a celebration because we are celebrating the actor and the person that we have admired for so long. We're not eulogizing.
No.
We're celebrating. And I think that's the best way to do it, is to celebrate the man and to remember him for all the great things that he did. A fantastic man.
And folks, with that note, go have a pint, go read a book, and celebrate the life of perhaps the last giant in cinema, in Christopher Lee, both physically, metaphorically, and artistically. And with that, we hope you've enjoyed the episode. Please stick with us. The legacy of Christopher Lee will still resonate throughout this podcast and what we do. And with that, we close, ladies and gentlemen. Most importantly, more than anything, to you and yours, have a most excellent day.
Now, the wind blows coldly through the broken battlements. Though this is my home, I must move on.